play g5 here and launch an all-out assault on that g6 pawn, which will be made a lot more vulnerable by the fact that the g-file will open up.
Yeah, however he's posing, he's not blitzing out. We assume that he will be very happy that he gets the chance of playing g5. And g5, f take g5, rook take g5, knight f7, that's the move that also gives black a lot of stability. The knight comes with a tempo, hits the rook on g5, and the rook falls back to g3. As you indicated, there will be a pressure on the g6 pawn. Also, this knight d6, knight f5 ideas are there, but things are heating up. g5 on the board.
Yep. And we have that position. Takes, and knight f7. As you were just showing, Peter, the or g5, and it drops back to g2. And I thought that rook g3 made a little bit more sense, but maybe Pragg trying to bring his rook all the way back away from the influence of black's knights.
Yeah, rook g3 looked a bit more natural, but okay, if you are in blitz mode, rook e6 played by Magnus as well, making sure that the d6 square is beautifully protected by the knight on f7, rook on e6. The rook also protects the pawn on g6, and eventually setting up this very nice little rook f6. We have already seen the move queen f6, which had such a big impact on the game. I do believe that rook f6, also combined with some knight f8 defending the g6 pawn, is a wonderful rerouting for black.
The initiative has changed hands several times in this endgame, but that doesn't mean it can't change hands again. Pragg now down to 2.5 minutes. And if black's knights get active, there is still that f4 square, there is still the d-file, and there is still the rook on a8, which has not made its presence felt just yet. But if Pragg takes his foot off the gas pedal and he lets black's knights get active, it's so hard to deal with a pair of active knights in time pressure. The move bishop b3 comes to mind, but case in point, you might be running into potentially knight d7 to c5. Although there are some tactics with rook takes f7 and knight takes e5. All of that has to be calculated carefully. And Pragg now under 2 minutes. You can sense the anxiety. Both players locked in concentration.
Yeah, very critical moment. It's if someone just looks at the evaluation bar and sees 0-0, he does not get the sense, the real feel for this position. This position has so much spice. There is so lot of finesses. Very crucial decisions for both sides in the next couple of moves.
Rook d2 hitting the knight directly. The knight can move, but Charlsen could also meet fire with fire. He could slide his rook to f6 nonetheless, and he does. And he offers an exchange of rooks that seems to be in black's favor.
Sensational play. Basically, rook e6 was connected with this rook f6. He had to force it at the rook move, rook d2, which hits the knight. Will be met by rook f6. Everything else would have run into some tactical issues. Amazing play by Magnus.
And Pragg now down to a minute on the clock. He's suddenly down 2 minutes, which could become really important as this endgame continues to sharpen up. White has several ways to keep the rooks on the board. He can double on the d-file. He can play rook f to d1, but then you have to reckon with the black knight getting super active on c5, and white's king is not entirely safe. The rook from a8 could later on, it could slide to the h-file and start exerting pressure on h2. 40 seconds for Pragganandhaa as he exchanges rooks, tries to simplify the position, and I like that decision.
I think it was the correct call. It's not about fighting for initiative. You just have to make sure that in time trouble with 40 seconds on the clock, you have things under control. Maybe even go b4. Yes, b4
Excellent
on the board.
Move. He is trying to simplify things by force. Exchange pawns, make this position easier to play, easier to handle with less than a minute on the clock. And Peter, he's built up 20 very important seconds with his last two moves.
Yeah, creates counterplay, also signals Magnus that, you still have that b7 pawn, and if I gonna get the pawn to a5, if I ever take that pawn on b7, then the a pawn will be way too powerful. This puts Magnus also on alert. I don't think that he can afford to play for the initiative. It might be that it's a dynamic balance.
And if he plays the move b5 himself, he runs into knight to b6, followed by a5. So it's entirely possible for black to lose control of this game. And I love Pragg's last move, b2, b4, remaining on top and creating practical pressure on black's king queen side. as Carlsen reroutes his king toward the center.
Yeah, he's probably setting up ideas like king e7, rook d8, trying to trade rooks. Is that a possibility, or is he thinking that if I have the king on e7, making sure that the anti-squares d7, d6 are well covered, then maybe I will be able to activate my rook on the h file? Is he hoping for some counterplay?
And Pragg
Very
doing
tense.
the same. He brings his own king up toward the center and maybe trying to overprotect the e4 pawn with king f3. First, he plays a5, fixing the queenside pawns, fixing the pawn on b7 for a rainy day. And Carlsen, we mentioned this move earlier. He brings his rook to the other side of the board, and he's starting to exert pressure on Pragg's kingside. That rook can dive into h4 and hit e4, and Black's knights are rearing to get even more active. This could get out of control for Pragg, who's down to 20 seconds now on the clock.
Yeah,
He's
under
hesitating.
some pressure. Yeah, it's never easy to start defending something with little time
10
on the
seconds.
clock.
He's got to move, and he does get 10 seconds added to his clock per move, but the situation starting to deteriorate just a little bit. Knight h5. Uh-oh, and the knight getting to f4. This is getting scary for Pragg.
The king g2 move was very unfortunate. Now he has to sidestep from the fork. King g1 played.
Knight f4, Magnus sensing the moment, and the other knight can jump into g5, creating fork threats, maybe even some mate threats in some situations. Uh-oh.
Just in a couple of... And Pragg down to 8 seconds.
And look at the speed with which Carlsen is moving. Every piece becoming more and more active. The rook coming into h3. It can drive into c3. And suddenly there are all these forks that Pragg has to keep in mind. He's got 6 seconds. And a6, a very panicky reaction as he gives up a pawn.
Yeah, it is a panicky reaction because knight a5 can be met by rook c3. Also, bishop a4 can be met by rook c3, knight g5. All this combination of forces seem too much to handle.
Knight g5 might be crushing because if white takes on e5, Black's king just moves up to e6, forces the knight out of e5, and then knight f3 will fork the rook and the king. And Magnus doesn't see it. He plays rook c3, but knight g5 now is even stronger. And he plays it. And this is almost over.
This is over, yes, because knight takes c6 can be met by rook takes c6, bishop c6, knight f3 fork. Pragg in a lot of trouble.
Knight f3, the knights are running amok. White's counterplay on the queen side has not amounted to anything. And Carlsen has left himself with 3 whole minutes on the clock to figure out the last couple of touches here. Black is completely winning here, but Pragg will continue to fight until the last drop of blood. He tries to get the rooks off the board, but Carlsen can play rook a3, and there's got to be some sort of a checkmating mechanism here. Knight h3 and rook a3 wins the game. It wins a piece.
Exactly. And Magnus pauses because he knows exactly that, yes, this is it. Let me just be precise. And yes, on the board, knight g5 to h3 check. No matter where white is going, king f1 or king h1 will have the same problem that rook a3 will follow with a double attack on the bishop and rook a1 checkmate. The knights, just monster knights.
And it took Carlsen so much time and so much finesse to get those knights to where they are. It took a lot of turnarounds and the initiative changed hands. But Carlsen laughs last, and he will laugh longest in this first game. He will just move his king to f6, getting away from the checks. And the threat of rook a1 checkmate and rook takes a4 forces Pragganandhaa to resign the first game.
Knight replacement, but the queen from a7 grabbing on d4 and controlling g1 squares most often. So now Magnus considers to take the pawn or not to take.
Yeah, is greed good? We've been asking ourselves that a few times now, and white could go 2 pawns up, hitting a 3rd pawn. It's definitely tempting, right?
Yeah.
I mean, especially if your opponent's only got 1.5 minutes, especially if you don't see a threat. We were talking about that earlier, right? You ask your opponent, you ask yourself what your opponent's ideas are. If you don't see anything, why not grab a pawn and hit this pawn in the center? What is Black intending?
Queen e3, knight c1, knight e2.
Wow, okay, the long way round. Get round this way, and we're going to find out the truth. And yep, you've called it. process of elimination again after white's queen took this pawn. Black had to bring the queen back, defending its pawn in the center, and also maybe hitting this one.
It was not a blunder from the Magnus side. He's supposed to deliver the knight back to the center by knight b6, knight d5 options, or knight b6, knight c4 options. So he clearly would keep control over the center, and the last piece is out of play for white. At the moment is knight. And yeah, this is what I expect him to do.
And with that knight on d5, or the knight maneuvering itself to a different square, I mean, the checkmating ideas that black has on the dark squares are going to be covered.
Yeah, true, because I'm attacking the queen, and knight is not in time to get to e2. So after I move the queen away, I have some time to regroup or to control d2 square by bishop f4. And I'm pawn up. I'm 2 pawns up. I'm sorry. I'm not talking about some extra options like e6 sacrifice and then bishop e5 just coming to the king. Magnus is back in play.
Yep. If the queens come off now, white is most likely going to win. Well, if you can arrange it in a favorable way because of these two connected passed pawns. So, yeah, Magnus, he just needs to find a way to re-centralize this knight, maybe re-centralize his queen at some point. And
but wait one second. I mean, we've been talking about like, okay, the knight can go on a journey, but there is a threat in the position, which is just to take the pawn.
Yeah, and Anna, I didn't blunder the pawn, but I blundered the next, that there is the perpetual on f3. Yeah?
Right.
Yeah, that's the point.
So, for example, if the white knight steps back, then knight takes pawn and potentially a draw. It's still not 100% clear, but the white king is in a bit of trouble. Maybe you can even take here as black, and white's king is going to be so open, especially on the light squares.
Ooh.
Imagine some trouble here. And okay, Magnus finds a really flashy way to bring his knight back into the action.
Whoa, look at the bar!
Yeah, is this clever or is this madness? The white knight coming back, trying to use the fact there's a pin on this diagonal, so black cannot take this knight yet.
Why are you not reacting more, David? Is this just the computer going
Trying to work it out.
Trying to work it out.
It's like kind of blunder according to machine, no?
Yeah, it isn't blunder according to the machine.
But maybe it's this exact variation we were showing, just in a different way. Why can't black just step back, take that pawn with his knight in the center? And this idea of, okay, actually, Pragg finds the best move. I was about to say, Stockfish, the computer, had 3 suggestions there. The move I mentioned, taking that white pawn, would have been fine for black, but this is even better.
Wow. And look at the 16-year-old now. He's, you know, he's bopping his head. He seems to be sensing that this is good.
Yeah, because look at white's knight now. Suddenly, it's kind of threatened. White's knight doesn't have anywhere good to jump. And also, black has this idea of bringing the knight forward later on. This checkmating pattern we showed, black's knight coming to the e2 square and black's queen trying to deliver checkmate to the white king.
And it seems Magnus only has one okay move right now.
Wow, you're right, Kaya. Stockfish confirms it. White's only move to survive and stay in the game is to bring the white knight back to the d1 square, hitting the black queen. Everything else you can pretty much resign.
Is that natural?
Yes.
Yes,
That's the only move.
Okay.
And if you are forced to find the only move, you usually find it.
Okay.
It's like you said, like Korchnoi said, you force your opponent to find the only moves. And the other 2 moves that were suggested there by the computer were nonsensical. Okay. They would have just been huge blunders. So, okay, white's knight. Oof, this is really hanging by a thread now for white. White's knight has blocked the second rank. Black was threatening a nasty checkmate. But look at this, Pragg upping the pace of his moves as well and creating threats on every turn. Yeah, I mean, I didn't react earlier because I was struggling to understand, but now I understand. White's queen is just too far offside. It was just greed. And how do you get her back in time? This looks very good for black now. Or at least very scary for white.
Also, the bishop on g3 all the time hanging. I can attack with the queen. We are g5 or e1. All the pieces are pinned. Knight on f2 misplaced. And we should never forget about the d pawn. Just imagine for a second that we trade all the minor pieces out from board. Then the d pawn comes. And doesn't matter if you're 2 pawns up in queen and games or 3 pawns up. As faster your only passer, as better it is. And yeah, you can read Magnus now. He clearly doesn't like the position.
Your queen moved to the first row. That looks to me very deadly because it threatens checkmate. And is there a way to prevent, you know, just to prevent this being checkmate? Maybe creating some air for the king, running with the pawn, or it's difficult to see what to do.
I'm struggling to even find a defense here for white, and Magnus clearly struggling as well. As you mentioned, Ivanka, the big threat in the position is the black queen coming down to the first rank. There are 2 safe squares actually on that first rank, and both of them look deadly.
There is only one potential loft is on h3 for the
Right.
king, but it will never happen because of bishop f5. Like bishop will give the mate after all.
Or the bishop can trap you and trap the king.
Yeah.
White would love to pick up his queen and teleport it back somewhere to the first rank, just to offer some trades or just to create some safety. But no, okay, Magnus does try and create that heir for his king. But as you guys mentioned, the only escape square for that white king is up the board on a light square.
8.5 on the bar.
Checkmate is just coming. What happens after black brings the queen down to the first rank on the e1 square? It's just, I mean, it's just checkmate
It's
coming.
like just game over.
It's just game over.
16-year-old Pragganandhaa, the youngest player in the tournament against the world champion. This could be a little piece of history in the making.
I think we've cursed Magnus. We didn't follow him today, and then he won all his games. As soon as we followed him,
right.
he's about to lose.
We followed him with Kosteniuk.
True. But he's about to lose a sensational game now. And there we go. White's queen trying to cover the light squares. That's quite clever. Trying to stop the black bishop from joining the action and trapping the white king. But
Yeah, but Magnus losing the piece after knight g3, queen e5, and potential bishop f5 check. He's just
that's just game over.
Like the simplest way. First, you have to calculate
40
is the
seconds.
capture.
Yeah, so maybe there are other moves as well, but black's knight going and capturing the white bishop wins on the spot. As Yevgeny points out there are some deadly checks. White's king is just in too much peril. Black could even maybe just push the pawn forward. That would be tempting as well. But knight takes bishop, and look at Magnus. He's realised he's about to lose. At minimum, he's going to lose a knight. Checkmate might be coming as well. No way to save this game. Okay, he takes a pawn, and black has plenty of ways to win this now. You can just move the knight, you can give a check, you can bring the knight back to where it came from.
Any square for a
Any safe
knight
square.
works, yeah.
Yeah. And white's king only has one safe square now. You have to go up the board. That is not going to be safe.
Wow, what a crazy moment, you guys. 16-year-old about to beat Magnus Carlsen.
Yeah, and he's just trying to cling on. Magnus has literally got his fingernails now, just clinging onto that cliff edge.
Yeah.
But, oh, wow, what a move. Black cuts the coordination between white's queen and the second rank. And is Magnus about to resign? Is he going to throw in the towel? White's knight now hit by the black queen. And if it moves, there's a deadly check in the corner. It's just game over.
Yeah, game over.
Wow, has he ever won before, Pragganandhaa, against Magnus Carlsen in any official game?
I don't think so.
I don't think
No, I
so.
don't think so.
It's a historical moment, and it's here. Magnus Carlsen, the world champion, loses to 16-year-old Pragganandhaa. Look at Pragg. He can almost not believe it.
Yeah, he's got to enjoy this moment, and rightly so. He played a great game. This check, and suddenly, disaster on the second rank. It's looking like Pragg is in charge. White, in order to alleviate the pressure, is going to have to retreat his queen. But now the white pawns are going to start dropping. And we will see Pragg give this check, I feel. This looks very strong now for black. He's turned it. We could see a massive comeback.
Yeah, I absolutely think we're going to see it. We are going to see Pragg turn the tables. And wow, he's been so ruthless actually in his last few moves. He's been clinical, he's been precise, but this is Pragg's his strengths. This is what he excels at. I don't know why Magnus is playing it into Pragg's hands.
Yeah, I mean, Magnus, just that one pawn capture in the centre. Why? It's just so ugly. You're in a situation, you're ahead in the match. I think Magnus, he feels at this point, he's had such a good tournament. He thinks he can get away with anything. But sometimes you just have to play it safe. And talking of getting away with anything, he's really playing with fire, marching out into the open. That king has no shelter.
I mean, can you play like this? I mean, is this even chess? I mean, this is just breaking the rules. I mean, I don't know what is Magnus doing. He's giving up all the pawns on the right, and he's desperately opening up lines just in order to get perpetual check. He's trying to bail out.
Yeah, he would love to bail out with a draw here, Magnus. That's the dream right now. But he does shake his head, closing his eyes there. He knows it's all gone wrong. Black's queen can give a bunch of different checks now. She can just drop down one square, check the white king along the diagonal. She can retreat to the g5 square, sitting next to a knight, checking the white king. This is a nasty check. And yeah, what can black play here? Still more checks on the board. You can take a couple of different pawns if you're black. Pragg is spoiled for choice. Up on the clock as well, and he's about to go one pawn up on the board. It's just looking phenomenal now. I think it's going to be a miracle if White saves this. White's knight as well. It's looked nice and pretty the whole game, but it's been far away from the defense. That's why the White king has had to run out into the open. It's king and queen. They were divorced again. Pragg is so good at spotting it when the opponent's defense is fragmented and divided like that.
And now the heat is on, and it's up to Pragg to find a way how to consolidate his position. And he gives check. This is a very sensible, build some time on the clock now that he had ticked under the 1 minute mark. And Magnus offering a repetition, like, would you like a draw? And Pragg should, of course, say, no way. Grab the pawn.
I would repeat the position once, Jovanka, gain 10 seconds on the clock.
Yes.
Show the opponent who's boss. Repeat the position twice, but not a third time. Don't go for that draw. And yeah, we'll definitely not see Pragg agree a draw here. Even with the clock situation where he's now down, he's got some very sensible moves. Again, just a couple of different checks with black. At the right moment, you can take White's central pawn. You've got to be careful because White's queen is going to go up to the top of the board with some annoying checks. But Pragg looks like he's panicking. He gives one check. White has nothing else to do but sidestep. The problem is for black, you can't bring your knight in with a check yet. You would love to plant the black knight on the f4 square, but White's queen covers that square. So maybe you just defend that square. Black's pawn can step forward to g5, getting that black knight in.
Oh, but you know, all those moves, they come with their risks, because regardless of what the computer says, you know, you're going to allow White this huge pass pawn, and it's not an easy decision to make. So instead, Pragg has just gone for repeating the position as much as possible. But the more he does that, the more time Magnus gets on the clock and the more confident he becomes.
Yeah, and Magnus now is happy not to repeat the moves. Now the black queen can't give check from behind. I feel Pragg has let something slip here. He's checked from the wrong angle. What is the black queen doing on this side of the board? It could have grabbed a couple of pawns on the other flank, and I think that would have been very safe. But suddenly, there's only one last check available to Pragg. He's only had a few seconds there. OK, he's captured a pawn, but now the queens are coming off. Magnus has found a way to get the queens off.
Oh, no, and this is going to be a turnaround.
Yeah, I think Pragg forgot about this check. Suddenly the queens disappear. Look at the left side of the board. White has 2 versus black's 1. I think maybe you can get away with that, but perhaps you shouldn't rush if you're Magnus Carlsen. Maybe you just push a few pawns, re-centralize the white knight, and you wait for the right moment to just pick off black's piece in the corner.
Yeah, I agree with you there, David, because if you're objective about the position, black is totally tied down, can't do a thing. So you don't need to rush to take the knight. Instead, like you say, advance some pawns, move the knights, and wait for black to move.
Yeah, just to show the one risk, if you do get greedy and capture this black knight, then suddenly you're stuck. The white king cannot escape. If you, for example, try to give a check to drive away the black king just moves, and still no escape for the white king. Also, remember, the white knight can't get too greedy, can't run away too far, because black does have a central pawn, a pass pawn of his own. So white's knight will have to retreat, return, and block this pawn. It feels like this should be winning anyway, but you have to be very careful because you're essentially playing without a king, and this pawn doesn't actually make a difference anymore on a7. So I'm expecting Magnus to hesitate, to pause. He's using all of his remaining time, and I think he can just simply retreat his knight, keep the tension. OK, he even goes back with his king. He leaves the black knight where it is. This is a dead piece anyway. First, he's going to hunt down some pawns with the white king. He might even take this guy at some point and then go back for the black knight. It's a bit surprising. He is really unsure of how to win this, Magnus. This is where evaluation bar versus human, it's so different. From a human point of view, it's not as easy as the computer shows. And Magnus does step back to capture this pawn. At least now Pragg can block the white king's path in towards his knight. But Magnus is playing for Zugzwang. He's hoping later on to break through and go for this knight once again. Still winning, but less straightforward now. That's for sure.
Yeah. It is less straightforward, but at the same time, it's kind of easier for white, less calculation involved, and more about improving the pieces. And there you can see Magnus putting his king opposite black's king. This is just great technique, taking something that we call the opposition.
Yep, and going for Zugzwang. Black's knight only has one legal move. It can come out with a check, but it will have to return into the corner. Pragg, meanwhile, his dream is to exchange off all the pawns on the right half, because white has one remaining pawn on h2, which is a potential queen. So Pragg wants to trade off, if he can, but it will again be a race. Black is playing without a knight temporarily, remember? And can Black kick away White's knight and then go after White's a-pawn while being in time to stop White's h-pawn from running? Magnus, he's spent all his time there. Has he calculated his way to victory? Pragg here, he just has to go for White's a-pawn. He has to free up Black's knight, and he has to cross his fingers and hope that the Black knight can jump across later to stop White's h-pawn. But it feels like it shouldn't be possible. Knights, remember, are terrible defenders when it comes to stopping rook's pawns, a-pawns and h-pawns. Valuation bar reacts, however.
Ooh.
The Black knight is out of jail. It was allowed to survive. It does feel, however, like it should still be winning for White. The evaluation bar does recorrect itself. But can Magnus hold off that Black knight? If he can sacrifice it, Pragg, for that White h-pawn, draw.
Yeah.
But it's still far from possible.
Well, I have now the in-game table base, which tells me that as long as Magnus starts pushing the h-pawn, completely winning. And the most obvious winning move is actually just to take the pawn on f6 with the king.
Yep, that looks very strong, very logical as well. Black's knight is going to try and come to capture that White h-pawn, but it shouldn't work. It should be too slow. And notice how Black's king, even if it grabs that White a-pawn, is miles away from the action. So that's why having these h-pawns, these a-pawns, they're so effective in knight endgames. In rook endgames, they're the worst type of pawn to have. In most endgames, they're the worst type of pawn to have. But in knight endgames, they're beautiful because knights can only stop these corner pawns from one side. And OK, Magnus steps back into the centre, and the question is now, can he start motoring?
Yep. And this is also a win. And here, everything loses, apparently. There is nothing that White can do to spoil the win. Oh, hang on a second. Hang on a second. Only one move now. Only one move for White to draw, and that is that Knight has to go and protect the pawn on a7. It has to jump to, yes.
Yeah. Yep, so it's White playing for the win, Black playing for the draw. So he does protect his pawn, keeps it alive, and Black's pieces, they're both stuck, both completely paralysed. Black's king in the corner, Black's knight stopping the advance of White's h-pawn. We should say as well, if Black can give his knight up for the h-pawn, even if White's a-pawn survives now, it is a draw, because Black's king is in the corner. There's no way to break through. It will always be stalemate. So you have to somehow sneak past that guardian of the h5 square, the Black knight. White's king might have to go the long way around. It might have to go kind of around and behind and then towards that Black knight. There's no way towards it yet. OK, he steps across. And here I'm expecting Black to continue waiting. Black's king is just going to go back and forth, and now it would be a huge blunder if Magnus pushes his h-pawn, because Black can take it, and that would be a draw. OK, now he moves his knight across. You have to kick away the Black knight with the White knight, and he's doing so.
He is doing it. He's removing that guardian, as you mentioned. And now the h-pawn comes, and yep, according to the table bases, completely lost for Black.
Black's king, again, it's caught on the wrong side of the board. This is the second or third time in the game the opponent's king is caught on the wrong side. And it's trying to race its way over, but kings are so slow. They're like old men with their walking sticks. It's just one step at a time. But pawns are just as quick, unfortunately, for Pragg here. And that pawn is 2 squares away. The Black knight has to stop it. But now we will see White's knight do a bit of a dance. It will drop back, and it will try to kick away this defender, the Black knight. White can also create a path in for his king by doing that.
Yeah,
White's knight is going to move.
But White does have to be accurate. The winning attempt is actually to move the knight back to the 3rd row, to the e3 or g3 squares, and maneuver itself that way. If it actually sprung forward to the d6 square, that would actually turn the tables.
How about
and it would
d4,
be a draw.
Jovanka?
If you went to d4, it's also winning.
That, to me, is the most logical here. You can retreat your knight to a few different squares. As Jovanka mentioned, these two are winning. To me, the most logical is to centralise. This is the first move that popped into my mind, because now the Black king cannot come towards the pawn. Magnus does play this. There's a trick now. If the Black king starts moving across towards the pawn, there's a nasty knight check, deflecting away the Black knight, and White is left with only a pawn in his whole army. But it's enough. There's no way to stop this pawn from promoting to a new queen. So this is so clever by Magnus. He's cut off the Black king from advancing to any of these 3 squares that would all be impossible now. So the Black knight has to wait, but now the White king is coming, and it's only a couple of moves away from dislodging the knight. This one is game over. You see Pragg look away. The knight is going to get kicked away. White will make a new queen. Game over. What a turnaround.
Magnus on fire. This is so impressive stuff by the world number one. And he will now be one draw away from winning the tour finals.
Yeah. He was on the brink of defeat. And also, Wesley had let it slip. Duda was about to win. Suddenly, both games, around the same moment, they turned around. And here we go. White's knight is irrelevant. It's key to go after Black's piece. And look at the 2 pawns. White is clearly ahead in any race.
Yeah.
Yeah, nothing to do. Pragg has to move his knight out of the way. You can move it to g5. You can retreat it to f8 with a check. Either way, White is going to continue chasing that Black knight.
Yeah. And unfortunately, okay, after this knight moves to the square, you can actually just capture the pawn and attack the knight, and you're still winning. And this looks so natural.
Yeah, remove the final defender of that Black knight. The knight has to retreat. It has to blockade. Knights, we say, are normally good blockaders, but just, again, it's these A and H pawns. They're the only pawn they struggle against. And here we go. Pragg is going to resign. No way to stop White's pawn anymore. And Magnus does take the win.
Incredible. Winning the second game in a row. Magnus Carlsen is up by 2 points. And he can not only decide the match, he can win the tour finals in the next game.
Spots a winning move for Pragganandhaa. I'm really curious if he found it. He found it! He played King H2. Do I see that correctly? He played the winning move! I'm sorry, I'm screaming, but that move is winning! It's winning, because now all the threats that David showed, the check on b8 and then check on b7, now it's gonna win the rook. There's no more check with the Black Queen going for the draw.
The check, the queen to b3 is also threatened now too, because before you couldn't do it because of queen c1 check. So you're right, Anna. Rook b8, queen b7, queen b3. Every single threat is back on the books, and you saw Magnus just give a bit of an exasperated kind of. Well, that's a tough one to follow.
What a move! King to h2, cool as a cucumber, winning move, moving the king 1 square up.
I love it.
That is so classy. That's prophylaxis, dodging checks in advance. That's great calculation, spotting that Black simply has no way to untangle now. And according to our featured chat here, at least, apparently it was the only move to win directly on the spot.
The only way to win in one move. King h2 might be a move that forces resignation. Somehow I doubt it. I think we'll get one more, but I wouldn't be surprised. That's why the hype was real. It was a star. A star is born. King h2, and Pragganandhaa is an absolute star. What a find. And yeah.
What a game this has been from start to finish. And we were praising Magnus Carlsen for his opening choice because he did find a way to make Pragg somewhat uncomfortable in the opening. We were talking about the pair of bishops, how Pragg prefers to play with the pair of bishops, and this was a line where the bishop would be traded. All those things did not matter. He didn't care. He said, okay, it's not what I prefer normally, but I can still play extremely well. And Magnus was too slow. He didn't castle. He went for queenside development, and that led to all the problems with the tactical patterns opening up the position. And now he needs to resign. Can he set up any traps? Is there any further tricks? Some last resource, David?
I don't see it.
David, you're on the spot. Find it. No, I agree.
Find the inexistent move to save the game.
I mean, first of all, incredible accuracy by Pragg. I saw a graph a moment ago showing White's advantage. That was really actually emblematic of how smooth he's been, how consistent he's been. Look at that. White's been better throughout, and it's only grown the advantage. What I would try, I think, if I were Magnus, just to try and prolong the fight 1 or 2 moves longer, Anna, I would ask one last question. Maybe play the move queen c6 to rule out one of your threats, just to stop rook b8, followed by queen b7. I cover the b7 square. But, I mean...
Queen b3.
Queen b3.
That's the other move that was coming. And
threatening checkmate in one is also pretty cool.
I have to block.
Queen e8 loses the queen, so if you block, I assume you just take d5 and keep marching forward.
Yeah.
You can check on b4 or a3.
Like your check, Anna, and just jump
check
in.
And get into e7.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. Even more efficient. The position is completely falling apart at the seams. And look at that game graph. That is a dominating performance start to finish. We call that a wire-to-wire victory. And again, yeah, full kudos and shout out to Pragg. I mean, anyone who saw the beginning of the show, I thought that Magnus's approach was kind of brilliant. As someone who's been in a spot where an experienced player just out transpositions you end up overthinking things and getting yourself in trouble. Pragg was using a ton of time on the clock, clearly looked uncomfortable. I think Magnus even had said himself in his first confessional visit that he kind of liked what he had gotten out of the opening, but he also acknowledged it was a provocative choice, it was an edgy choice, and when Pragg found it, he never looked back, as you could see. This has been absolutely incredible. Pragganandhaa is... he's also just comfy there. He works hard at the board, but feels like he has a presence that he knows this is no longer a surprising result for him. He expects to get the job done when he has white against anybody, even if it's Magnus Carlsen.
Yeah, and it feels like if we didn't know who his opponent was, you would think that he's playing against someone that maybe has less experience or lower rated. From the way he dominated this game, it's crazy to know that this is Pragganandhaa versus Magnus Carlsen. This is an 18-year-old chess rock star taking down the #1 player in the world with a move like king to h2. I would not be surprised if this becomes the move of the day, by the way. King to h2, move of the day. That would be my candidate.
Move of the day. He's 18. By the way, didn't Gukesh turn 18 like today? Today. So the couple,
happy birthday!
Some 18-year-olds out there. Happy birthday to Gukesh, perhaps from your countryman Pragganandhaa, getting a dub for you.
What a present! What a present to India as well.
What a present to India, a present for Gukesh. Pragg is on the verge of delivering, beating the tournament leader, and I don't think Magnus Carlsen has much more in the tank here. You asked a question earlier, Anna, whether this position was survivable.
Survivable, word of the day.
Survivable.
Survivable
for Pragg. Is the position survivable? Well, guess what? They looked it up, and it is a word of an accident or ordeal able to be survived, not fatal. So,
is it survivable?
We're batting 3 for 3. We have not made up any words yet. Survivable. No, this position is not survivable. It is not able to be survived for Magnus Carlsen. It is fatal.
Yeah, and one thing I'll point out, and I shouldn't be mentioning this because he's one of my best friends out there, Magnus, but the only way to beat him, attack. Players respect him too much, swap off queens, try to play for a draw. You never ever see Magnus lose an endgame. You never see him get outplayed positionally. It's just king safety. He didn't castle his king. He gets mated. And this does happen from time to time. The kind of classical losses, rapid losses, blitz losses he has, they're only ever due to king safety issues. So keeping the queens on by Pragg, inspired decision, going for the attack, and the way he executed it. Not many people capable of that, of course, but impressive stuff.
Does it mean, David, then, in your opinion, that sometimes you kind of need to not respect how strong, how experienced your opponent is, that you're playing the world #1, the man that has ruled the chess world for over a decade by now? You somehow need to forget all those titles and just go and play always one move at a time. Is that the recipe? As much easier said than done, of course.
I told you, if Magnus could just show up in a mask and they didn't know they were playing him, maybe they would launch more attacks. No, but David, I agree. It's easier said than done, of course, but you have to be aggressive against Magnus Carlsen.
It's the only way.
And it's paying off for Pragg. He has he's known one speed in this game. And that speed, I believe, was like 178 miles per hour. It was speeding. It was illegal how fast he was going, and Pragg has kept his foot pedal to the metal all game. And
3,000 miles an hour, this one. I'm actually just remembering, I was going to mention Qatar Masters, where Magnus lost to a far lower rated player. He got attacked, checkmated pretty much. That was also a hedgehog. So Magnus, maybe the hedgehog isn't his favorite animal after all. This opening coming back to bite him.
Interesting.
And we really praised him so much for the opening choice, and we thought that Pragg was going to be uncomfortable, but he proved us all wrong. He proved us that it didn't matter, that it's not the kind of opening he wanted or that he prepared for. He was ready for the fight no matter what. I love that they are so disrespectful in a way that they go for it. These youngsters, Pragganandhaa, Gukesh, they're showing that it's the best approach against the experienced top players of the world, that you just... Oh, I thought that was resignation for a second.
Rook to g8.
The king almost fell, but it's rook to g8.
It does lose the rook, I believe, so I'm not sure what the trick is. David, you spot something?
You cannot check. I thought it lost the rook as well, but if you check, the black king hides g7, h8 into the corner.
Ah, okay, yeah.
That's
Okay,
clever.
so it doesn't lose the rook.
Yet.
It doesn't lose the rook yet.
What about our other threat? Our other attempt was queen b3.
Queen to
Queen
b3.
b3.
And there's no rook takes g2. That was my first thought. Is there a sacrifice by the rook and some sort of renegade perpetual check by
He's
Magnus?
about to
But I
play
don't
it.
think so.
Pragg is about to play queen to b3.
Yep.
Yeah, and queen b3 has another idea as well. If, for example, black blocks with d5, then you give the check. And if king g7, then you slide the white queen across to g3.
Oh, nice.
So there's actually
Very, very pretty that the g5 will be then crucial. Queen to g3, picking up the rook on g8. This is, I think, just the last attempt by Magnus Carlsen, whether Pragg will play the winning move, and he does. Queen to b3, threatening checkmate on f7, and there is no defense for the world number one. This is it. Game over. I think he might play one move more, perhaps, or not even. What do you think, David? d5 and then see what happens,
There
and
we
then
go.
resign.
d5, but now, as we mentioned, this check is decisive. The black king cannot snake its way into the corner. If the black king tries to enter the g file, there will be another check, a second check from a new angle, and game over. Magnus is trying to keep his poker face. Normally we see more head shakes from Magnus, but I think he respects how much Pragg, how accurate Pragg has been today.
Yes, he definitely respects him a lot. And
Wow.
Takes
Pragg
h7.
takes the pawn on h7 instead of the check that we were expecting.
No, but this is great. Threatens checkmate in
Oh,
2.
it's perhaps even stronger.
With queen to b8 check.
There were multiple ways of winning.
Multiple ways of winning. Magnus maybe plays queen d6, maybe resigns. Queen d6 is met by queen to b7, because then there will be no more rook sacrifices on g2. And there you
And
go.
there's
Magnus
this.
Carlsen has resigned. Pragganandhaa has beaten the world number one, the former world champion, but greatest player of all time, arguably, Pragganandhaa. The future is bright. And currently, the stars are shining here in Norway. The youngest player in the field gets it done, beats the tournament leader. They're discussing something about the variation, but either way, India is discussing whatever party they're going to throw now.
For Gugesh's birthday, for Pragganandhaa's win over Magnus Carlsen, Vaishali leading the women's event. There's so many reasons that they need to celebrate.
Absolutely wild. Much of it and celebrate later on their stream at the end of the day.
Yeah, 48 minutes, and we will be celebrating for them. Who will be celebrating in this game, though, yet to be seen. Magnus has a small advantage, I would say, just due to his pawn on d4, extra space. He backs up that pawn with a rook. Again, this is a Magnus Carlsen type of position with small but long-term pluses. Here, though, Pragg, again, great tip for everyone at home. Break out. If your opponent occupies the center, challenge that center. Pawn breaks are the key. Almost symmetrical pawn structure, though, now. Pragg's been so impressive today, Anna.
Very impressive, very solid, very pragmatic against the greatest player of our time, who had really so many praises toward Pragg after their match at the World Cup. And also here, it's Pragg, the only person, the only player who beat Magnus Carlsen earlier in the event in classical chess.
Indeed. And well, he still has a time advantage, but it's not 3 minutes. It's almost down to 2. And trying to make things happen there. I think rook c1 comes next, tries to take advantage of the black queen on c5 and get the rooks going on those open highways, the c and the d files, respectively.
I have a funny move here for black. You don't move the rook, but play bishop h5 to trade more pieces.
Wow, that is
Ooh.
clever. Spicy stuff. The bishop goes to h5, trading off a beautiful white bishop. Okay, slight slip from Pragg. Maybe he should have gone for that, Anna, because now the black rook looks really awkward. It's going to be hit in various lines by the white knight jumping to c6. Maybe not now, because the black rook will simply slide across to attack that knight, but watch out. I like Danny's move. Keep it simple.
I was going to say, but my move, rook to c1, is even better now because now knight c takes b5 is a threat that also attacks the rook. So rook to c1, in fact, it's on the board. Magnus likes it too. All kinds of discovered threats, all kinds of awkwardness for that rook. This is a position where people blunder. The rook is awkward, the queen is attacked with the discovered move by the knight coming. The knight's coming to c6. This is super tough for Pragg.
Ooh, and he slides his queen across to the other flank. It looks like that's far from where the action's actually happening. I wonder whether the knight jumps in now for Magnus Carlsen. He does leap in with that knight. And wow, counterattack by Pragg, leaving his rook hanging.
Okay, that is a rook sacrifice.
Magnus needed to take that knight, otherwise the bishop on f3 would have hung, and a huge attack for black, checkmating attack potentially. So Magnus now, look at that, shake of the head.
And he shakes his head. He missed knight e5, and playing a4 might even be a move he wants back, because the moment he played it, I feel like he had that realization or reminder, hey, this is Armageddon. Like a4, he played it, and I know that grimace was like, oh wait, that may be the best objective move, but it's probably not the right move when I need to keep winning chances on the board. That was not a happy Magnus after his a4 pawn push.
Yeah.
95, what a move it was by Pragg.
Amazing.
Oh my gosh.
We talked about his calculation skills, and that's what gives you the edge sometimes at this top level. Magnus was playing on feel, going in the right direction there with his pieces, but Pragg throwing a spanner in the works. And look at this, he's trying to bully Magnus by offering a trade of queens, giving the black king some luft now, some air to breathe. Looks like Pragg is on the brink of just locking this game down. White still for choice due to a more active bishop, and maybe the black A pawn weaker than the white B pawn. But ultimately, this should be a level position.
Level position, and the party starting soon below our studio. I don't know if our viewers can hear the music, but the Guinness World Record is gonna create so much hype.
It's gonna be
just
hype.
a few
There's
meters
music
from us.
playing. I don't know if any drinks are coming out yet. They're going to be taking a victory lap here because every single game from here on out for those guys is just increasing their hold on the Guinness World Record. But all right, Magnus trying to increase his hold over the queen side. The a6 pawn being spied by the sniper on e2. But if you take b6 and just put rooks on b7 and b8, are we just getting a big trade of a for b pawn? If those two pawns come off and we have a 4-on-4 kingside, Magnus is going to lose this Armageddon battle.
Yeah, and it would be his second Armageddon loss in a row after we talked about him being the Armageddon king. The Farmageddon for Magnus Carlsen, just beating everyone at Armageddon. It looks like the tide has turned potentially, but maybe Pragg missed a trick not trading the queens. I liked your idea, Danny, just get the queens off the board. The comparison here, white's queen much more active than its counterpart. So still alive and still with an almost 2-minute time advantage on the clock. Magnus Carlsen. Okay.
What can Pragg do about this now that the queens are still on the board and his one is the one that's more passive? Is there any way he could activate his pieces and also get the f8 rook into the game?
Yeah, he suddenly has to be careful. I just realized if you play a move like rook to c8, there are tactics. Knight takes e6 would be a winning blow. Threatening checkmate on g7 and tactics in the air with rooks hanging on the a7 square. He brings his queen forward to b6. Ooh, that hangs together by a thread. The black knight defends its queen.
I wonder if he even saw knight takes e6. He's lucky it all works, right? Because knight takes e6 is still tricky here. If you take with the queen, the rook hangs, but you can somehow take with the pawn, and there's no traps there. Does Magnus look to play a move like e4 and try to get that tactic on the board? Bishop f3, but similar idea. If that knight moves from d5, knight takes e6 is back on the agenda.
Yeah, white would win a pawn due to hanging pieces on this diagonal, the black queen, black rook behind it. So I think you have to leave the knight on d5. You might be left with an isolated pawn in the center. Suddenly, chances alive. Pragg really regretting, surely, leaving the queens on the board. Magnus is great in queen endgames, great in just centralized queen positions in general. And Pragg with tactical dilemmas to solve. That's why he's having to burn the clock now, suddenly, Pragg.
He definitely is regretting the choice of keeping the queens on the board by now, I think.
Yeah, he defends his queen. Wise choice. Magnus will likely take this knight off the board.
Yeah, you don't want to let queen takes b2. Either that or b3. You either keep the pawn protected by the knight on c5, or you take d5. But I kind of like b3 because I want to avoid all kinds of trades. And if you give me a moment, I'd like to play like h4, h5 as white and keep the queen centralized, create pressure on the king side, all types of practical pressure is what to do here, especially with the time pressure coming.
I can tell you've watched Magnus play before, Danny. That's right up his alley, h4, h5.
Yeah, he must have calculated something concrete, though. He decides to take... He might still play for b3, by the way, not allowing a big trade of pawns for pawns here.
Yeah. Keep some tension left. The white b pawn, a potential queen. The more pawns left on the board, the greater your winning chances in any endgame. Anna, what's your prediction? Do you think Pragg's going to be able to hold this with only 2 minutes 50 on his clock?
This is a tough one. I feel like Magnus will win, but at the same time I'm rooting for Pragg to prove me wrong. It's kind of like both. Can I say both, Danny?
You're allowed to say both. That's okay. We know you don't want to be put on the spot with them. You're rooting for everyone. But all right, Magnus is playing for b3 now. The threat of taking d5 is much more real. We expected that move. I like it. And don't give up on the h4, h5 plan. Just because the pieces were traded doesn't mean it's not coming. And just because that game's going doesn't mean we don't have another one. Vaishali taking on Anna. This is a battle where Vaishali, if she can strike, she would slow down the tournament leader, and we would have a leapfrog at the top of the standings. I think it was Wenjun's victory, which, by the way, we still haven't given enough credit to. She beat Pia Cromling in this crazy game. We're going to make sure we give you a full game review and analysis. I may be wrong about the standings and the leapfrogging. I haven't checked it closely, but the point is it's a very, very close race at the top of Norway Chess Women.
Yeah, Vaishali would close the gap on Anna Muzychuk. Meanwhile, fireworks from Magnus Carlsen. Double exclamation point move. I can confirm. Knight e6 landing, forcing a queen trade. And Magnus, it's good knight versus bad bishop. Will it be good knight for Pragg? It's going to be a horrible endgame to defend now. The black bishop, a real bystander to the action right now. This is Magnus's bread and butter, surely.
His territory, he loves it. Knight e6, didn't miss his chance to simplify matters. And now it is super hard to hold. That bishop on g6 is just wishing it could play. You can even move it to c2, but it doesn't matter because you're not actually threatening to take b3. So a really nice transition. We say that when pawns are on both sides of the board, you often do prefer the bishop, but when a knight is centralized, it neutralizes the power of the bishop in most cases, and this is no exception.
Pragg jumping in. He's trying to somehow go after the white pawn. If the queenside pawns disappear, Pragg will likely draw. But Magnus needs to keep the b-pawn alive. The world number one picks up a piece to fiddle with. He looks anxious. 3.5 minutes against just under 2 minutes. The Armageddon on the other side of your screens, on the right side of your screens there. Vaishali giving up her bishop pair. It looks like a great start for Anna Muzychuk on that board. Okay, brother, sister, both in action right now in the Armageddons.
Both of them in action and both of them are trying their very best. But can Pragg defend this? He still needs to hold on to that a5 pawn. Rook c5 would be a way to defend the pawn, but it looks a bit suspicious that everything is just hanging in there by a thread.
Yeah, and Pragg drops his bishop back, asking for a trade of one set of rooks. Due to white's weak back rank, you cannot yet go pawn grabbing. You need to give the white king some breathing space. Pragg, yeah, he's such a great defender, but Magnus is the endgame grinder. So hard to see beyond Magnus here with the extra time on the clock.
Pragg really is so tenacious. He's just done it so many times in this event. You really got to give him credit for it. It's the thing that doesn't show up in the scoreboard, even if he loses a game like he did to Hikaru Nakamura, right? What people didn't see if they didn't watch it was just how close Pragg came to stealing a stalemate from the jaws of defeat there. He did lose to Hikaru, but that's just one example on my brain right now. But yeah, this kid is just so tough to take down. But again, I think Magnus will get this job done. He's bringing the king over to d2, which is going to be a massive help because the king and knight collectively will guard the c2 square, which allows white to be more aggressive when you're not worried about that move any longer.
Wow, Pragg drops his bishop back to f5 where it can be captured, wrecking the black pawn structure. But I think he just needed to keep this bishop on the diagonal. If he'd gone the other way, there would have been tricks with b4, black bishop hanging. Big question now, rook trade. Who does it favor? Can Magnus go for this? Rook's off the board. It's pure knight versus bishop now.
Got to be good for Magnus.
Surely. But the eval bar says no. How frustrating is that? There have been famous examples. I remember Karpov once drawing a game with an isolated queen's pawn like this. Good knight versus bad bishop, where he just sat. There was no way forward for white. But Magnus can maneuver around forever now with his knight. I expect this game to go on at least another 50, 60 moves as Magnus tries to recircuit his knight and win a black pawn, Anna.
And that's the thing, the time will be a factor too, because even if Pragg's position should be holdable, he will need to hold it with only 46 seconds left on the clock, and the increment is only 1 second. This is just so much time trouble.
Holy bejeezer snaps with that stat.
Wow.
13.5 out of 14 when he
Wow.
is white in Armageddon games. That shouldn't be legal.
That's against world-class opposition.
Yeah, he's not playing Armageddon games against me on the weekends. You know what I mean? I mean, this is this is a guy who's taken on the best players in the world and getting it done at a percentage that makes you question what you think is possible. All right, but Pragg making us question what might be possible in terms of defense. Again, I expect he's going to lose this game because of the point Anna made, which was a great one. 1 second increment is not a lot on the clock, and it's going to be super tough in a scramble. The knights are so pesky, David. I said the bishop is preferred when there are pawns on both sides of the board, but the knight is preferred in spots like this. It can switch colors back and forth, poke and prod, and it's going to be really hard to deal with that now that you're under 20 seconds.
Yeah, and Magnus is creating a second front of attack. Black has a weak isolated pawn. And now White's trying to make a pass pawn of his own, but Pragg retreats his king, giving up a pawn. That was the only way to keep the game going.
No way.
Pragganandhaa, tenacious should be his middle name, because he's defending this like a lion. Magnus can go up a pawn. He does win that pawn, but ultimately 3 versus 2. Magnus running out of material. Can the black bishop hold off the white knight? Still tough.
Still very tough, and as tough as Pragg is defending, it's bound to happen that he cracks under so much time pressure, and the evaluation bar is jumping even further.
Yeah, I think now Magnus can even play g5, put the pawns where they sit, then bring the knight back, and the king and knight should be able to do work advancing on the dark squares specifically. Okay, he plays knight f4 check. Would love to get king e5. Maybe now g5, and then the king enters into e5. But again, it is hard, and you already said his middle name should be tenacious. If that's Pragganandhaa. I don't know what his middle name is. That is a stat for another day.
Yeah, in the meantime, look at this. He's put the black king on a really safe square where it cannot be checked. And the question is whether Magnus can enter with his own king. The bar shoots up. It's going to be difficult for black to defend now. The white king is coming. And yeah, I think, Danny, as you mentioned, eventually the white knight will check the black king away. The white king will make further inroads into the position. It's going to be a long task, but inevitable now. Looks like Magnus Carlsen is going to extend that incredible run with white in Armageddon. As the other Armageddon, it's a repeat of this exact same opening line. Firouzja against Nakamura. Looks like both players done their homework in the break there.
And the slight change with how the knight placement happened in this Armageddon game. But wow, crazy that it's the exact same opening. The board on our left is about to conclude soon. I feel like Pragg with only 4 seconds left on the clock.
Yeah, and he does it. Magnus Carlsen gets the job done. It might even have been lower. The DGT has trouble keeping